There is kind of an interesting legal move going on in the European Union, and while it's a fair way of passing if it ever will, the potential consequences for Nintendo's online game strategy are actually quite significant, and we actually saw the first consequences of it just in the last few days with the announcement of the fate of Animal Crossing Pocket Camp. What is happening? What does this proposed law stipulate, and how would it affect Nintendo and games like Tetris 99 and F-Zero 99, or even titles which are extremely online focused like Splatoon and Mario Maker? Let's get into it. So the proposal is something called a European Citizens Initiative, or ECI. Introduced in 2009, and ECI allows ordinary people, citizens of any of the member countries of the European Union, to submit a proposed piece of legislation. The bar is pretty high to get something considered. The initiative must be supported by 1 million citizens from a quarter of the member states, so 7 different countries. And even then, the European Commission only has to consider it, and for it to become law, it would also need to be reviewed by the Council of the EU and the European Parliament. On average, legislative procedures take over 3 years, and since the process has not yet even begun, and if that 1 million people can't be gathered, won't be found, you might think that it's a fairly distant concern for Nintendo of Japan. Still, even if this particular avenue of legislating may not work out for campaigners, these issues often have a habit of continuing until they get attention somewhere, and for Nintendo, multinational corporation that it is, they really need their games to be future-proofed for all territories. So let's look at the specifics of the legislation, and I will quote from their own objectives. This initiative calls to require publishers that sell or license video games to consumers in the European Union, or related features and assets sold for video games they operate, to leave said video games in a functional, playable state. Specifically, the initiative seeks to prevent the remote disabling of video games by the publishers before providing reasonable means to continue functioning of said video games without the involvement from the side of the publisher. The initiative does not seek to acquire ownership of said video games, associated intellectual rights or monetization rights. Neither does it expect the publisher to provide resources for the said video game once they discontinue it, while leaving it in a reasonably functional, playable state. Okay, so we're talking here about video games which are online focused in nature, but where publishers eventually pull support and the games become, in essence, unplayable. The initiative goes on to explain, an increasing number of publishers are selling video games that are required to connect through the internet to the game publisher or phone home to function. While this is not a problem in itself, when support ends for these types of games, very often publishers simply sever the connection necessary for the game to function, proceed to destroy all working copies of the game, and implement extensive measures to prevent the customer from repairing the game in any way. This practice is effectively robbing customers of their purchases and makes restoration impossible. Besides being an affront on consumer rights, video games themselves are unique creative works. Like film or music, one cannot be simply substituted with another. By destroying them, it represents a creative loss for everyone involved and erases history in ways not possible in other mediums. Existing laws and consumer agencies are ill-prepared to protect customers against this practice. The ability for a company to destroy an item it has already sold to the customer long after the fact is not something that normally occurs in other industries. With license agreements required to simply run the game, many existing consumer protections are circumvented. This practice challenges the concept of ownership itself, where the customer is left with nothing after buying a game. So the initiative goes on to explain that they are contending that this breaches the Charter of Fundamental Rights in the European Union by depriving people of possessions without compensation and by failing to offer adequate consumer protection. As it stands, every European country has a significant number of signatories, but as yet they have not triggered the threshold required in any jurisdiction apart from Sweden, with the numbers at the time of writing ranging from 87% of the required threshold in Denmark and nearly 98% in Poland to 7% in Malta and Cyprus. So there is a long way to go, but there's also a fair time to get traction. The deadline is not until the 31st of July 2025, so they have nearly a year to secure the support they need. I'd say there's at least a 50% chance that they meet the threshold of signatories in time, and there is precedent. Since the Lisbon Treaty made this legal innovation possible, initiatives have become law, including rights to clean water, although there are also initiatives that gain the threshold but then are refused, such as a campaign to phase out nuclear energy. All things considered, it strikes me that the people proposing the new law have a fair case, and it's conceivable that by 2028 or 2029, legislation in the European Union could be enacted on this. Even if it's not, the UK government was called to respond on this topic as well. Their response was broadly non-committal but did show a little room for campaigners to continue pressing their case. First, they said consumers should be aware that there is no requirement in UK law compelling software companies and providers to support older versions of their operating systems, software, or connected products. There may be occasions where companies make commercial decisions based on the high running costs of maintaining older servers for video games that have declining user bases. However, the government also noted, if consumers are led to believe that a game will remain playable indefinitely for certain systems, despite the end of physical support, the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations of 2008 may require that the game remains technically feasible, for example, available offline to play under those circumstances. Nevertheless, the government specifically discussed products being offered for sale which do not meet quality rights, noting, if the digital content does not meet these quality rights, the consumer has the right to a repair or replacement of the digital content. If a repair or replacement is not possible or does not fix the problem, then the consumer will be entitled to some money back or a price reduction, which can be up to 100% of the cost of the digital content. These rights apply to intangible digital content like computer software or a PC game, as well as digital content in a tangible form like a physical copy of a video game. The CRA has a time limit of up to 6 years after a breach of contract, during which a customer can take legal action. If one assumes, and I'm not a legal expert, so others might have a different take, that the contract is effectively entered into at point of sale, then effectively Nintendo needs to ensure that its products are not on sale in the UK for 6 clear years before they remove digital features from gaming products in order to feel safe about not falling foul of this legislation. With the Wii U discontinued in 2017, they seem to have waited just over this period to discontinue, say, the Splatoon and Mario Maker servers on Wii U. But just because the UK legislation operates one way does not mean other jurisdictions won't take a different approach. I think it is inevitable that as we move into a world with more online games, and as the primary audience of these online titles age into a position where they have legislative capacities, we are going to start to see tighter scrutiny of how online games operate. So now let's circle back to the Nintendo of it all, because for a long time the House of Mario wasn't very closely associated with online at all. Even today, Nintendo does not have a lot of these types of games, but it does have a few, and because they have a lot of evergreen titles which they want to resell, it's something I'm sure they're keeping a very close eye on. The thing is, once the legislation actually gets into the European lawmaking system, it's impossible to know exactly what will come out from their deliberations, and so it would be prudent to consider ways ahead of time to future-proof themselves against these kinds of changes. So let's consider the kinds of online games that could be affected, starting with the one you may well argue has already been affected: Animal Crossing Pocket Camp. When those woodland folk take down the tent and head off from the mobile scene, Nintendo has taken the unusual step of committing to release an offline version. The Pocket Camp social media feed this week said, "You should know that we are developing a version of Animal Crossing Pocket Camp that users can continue to play with their existing save data. We plan to share details around October 2024, so we ask for your patience until then." Now, perhaps Nintendo just thought that this was the stand-up thing to do, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised if they had seen which way the wind was blowing even before this latest legal squall blew up. Also, frankly, cash-grabby gacha mobile games have always felt like an uneasy fit for Nintendo, with the risk of potentially damaging their squeaky clean brand, whereas allowing a paid version seems like a reasonable nod towards preservation, while still, frankly, earning Nintendo some further money. But Nintendo has never been shy about pulling games from the market before, and they've historically been quite cagey about letting certain games out of their vault. So let's look a little broader than just Pocket Camp to see how this mindset change could affect things going forward. First of all, there are a great many titles which have some element of online play, but the closure of game servers would only have a marginal impact on the title. Super Mario Bros. Wonder is a perfectly playable game without the online features, and it would be an ambitious legal mind who decided to argue otherwise. I think these titles are on safe ground. Then we have the other extreme, a number of games which are entirely reliant on online, but generally speaking are immune because nobody has directly purchased them. Super Mario Bros. 35, Tetris 99, Pac-Man 99 and so on are games provided essentially as a freebie within the online service. Their core gameplay mechanics rely entirely on other players to provide meaningful content, but I don't think the law would touch these titles because Nintendo can, with some justification, say that the games were not discreetly sold, but were benefits available for that period of time on that particular service. Or at least they would be able to argue this if it weren't for the fact that they decided to sell physical copies of Tetris 99, which might complicate the issue. No physical release of F-Zero 99 has yet been proffered, and there may be good reasons for that independent of these proposed laws, such as the fact that, unlike Tetris, F-Zero is a fairly niche property, and the fact that the Nintendo Switch online service is so much larger now than when Tetris 99 launched in 2019. Still, if they did offer it for sale this year, it's essentially a commitment to support the title until 2030 at least, and while I don't think they currently have any intent to take it down, Nintendo have done this in the past, as with Super Mario Maker 35. And actually, even Tetris 99 may look like a hostage to fortune if legislation tightens in the coming years. In light of these complexities, I'm putting a 10% chance of a physical edition of F-Zero 99 being released before the end of 2025. Very low indeed. But now we come to the most difficult titles of all, games which will continue to boot up and be accessible after the server supporting multiplayer gaming is closed, but whose very identity as games are built around their online infrastructure. I'm talking about Mario Maker and Splatoon. Let's take Mario Maker first of all. The vast majority of the Wii U Classics content was essentially reliant on the provision by Nintendo of servers to host user-created levels. You can still make a level on Mario Maker, which strictly speaking fulfills the promise set out in the game's title, but if you can't share it, that limits the scope of what you can do considerably. Moreover, I think this falls squarely into the category described by the Citizens Initiative of harming creative works in a way that is not possible in other mediums. Mario Maker's creations were not just a product of Nintendo, but an artistic expression by the thousands upon thousands of fans who contributed to it, and the loss of these levels is, in essence, an act of destruction of art. With Splatoon, the art case doesn't hold up as it's more of a competitive title, but the withdrawal of online features is nevertheless a dagger in the heart of the title's viability. And we have to expect that Splatoon 2 will eventually go the same way. And yes, there are sequel games, but I for one will rue the day that I can no longer play on favourite stages, such as the vertiginous Moray Towers. Here Nintendo has something of a get-out-of-jail-free card. They can say, with some justification, that the game's multiplayer modes may have been disabled, but they are still functional titles for their single-player campaigns. As for Mario Maker, the game is called Mario Maker, not Mario Sharer. The game still performs the tasks that its title promises, it just happens to be a diminished version of what the promotions promised at launch, and what was provided for its first several years. As for Splatoon, it's an even easier case to make, as the Splatoon games always contain some kind of significant single-player mode, which means that even without an internet connection, the games are still providing some value. If the culture shifts against allowing companies to close down these kinds of experiences, Nintendo may receive flack, but would that matter? Nintendo don't mind dipping their toe into controversial waters and riding out fan criticism if it suits them. Super Mario 3D All-Stars was released as a limited edition title, and despite fan ire, they ploughed ahead anyway. The point at which they would care is if the law is specific enough that it directly hurts titles like Mario Maker and Splatoon, and while they will take legal advice in the future, I suspect that they have already consulted widely to ensure that they are in a highly defensible position for the likes of Mario Maker 2 and Splatoon 2, to name just two titles which are likely to have online support discontinued in the decade ahead. Indeed, it seems clear to me that their decisions around Animal Crossing Pocket Camp show that they have already taken on board the way the wind is blowing on this issue. There is also a practical consideration. Nintendo could probably afford to maintain support for these games indefinitely, but it makes for a larger ongoing cost and therefore a higher risk for offering titles such as this in the market in the first place. This could limit the willingness of the company to experiment further in this field for risks of open-ended legal exposure. But while 9 years may feel like a relatively short time for Splatoon to get effectively splatted, it is impossible to imagine that companies could be compelled to support games such as this eternally. One solution would have to be to offer an equivalent means to access content. For example, if Mario Maker levels were a benefit of the online service going forward, I can't imagine any of these courses are enormously taxing on storage, and Mario is popular enough that this might be a nice additional benefit to Nintendo Switch Online. Still, I can't see Nintendo going to the effort to promote fan-made levels as a draw for their Premier service. So the other option is simply not to sell games, and by that I don't mean that they would cease production of Splatoon, but that they would reconfigure what is offered where. When Splatoon 4 hits the market, it could simply be a single-player campaign mode, but with the benefit of a Nintendo Online membership, Splatoon players could also access a special additional online mode on a limited basis as a freebie. This may sound like splitting legalistic hairs, and of course it is, but Nintendo is a company that has strict rules for Nintendo Direct announcers referring to titles as the such-and-such game, so onerous legal workarounds in defense of their intellectual property is hardly unheard of for them. Or it might push them down the route of a games-as-a-service model. With Splatoon and Animal Crossing especially, I sometimes think that this model of physical releases every 5 to 10 years is a little out of date. Having the games be a subscription-based service would instantly negate the purchasing issue and would allow for them to continue to grow and grow indefinitely, with Nintendo offering a trickle of content on a regular basis. The continued support of Animal Crossing Pocket Camp for nearly 8 years is a demonstration that this can work. It would stop Nintendo being able to do massive reconfigurations of their games between each iteration, but if they stuck with one version of the game and supported those for much longer, they could benefit from a continual trickle of income for their titles, which gives them more financial security and means they would need to ramp the titles up quite slowly. This does create its own controversies though. Let's say they introduce a new subscription-based Animal Crossing in 2026 and support it until the Switch 3 enters the scene in 2034. 8 years is an incredibly good run, but now they want time to retrench, do the next generation of Animal Crossing and not have it compete with the old game. Do they close down the old version of the title, or be in the situation they've always sought to avoid of having competing editions of the same types of games on sale at once? Moreover, it would be a cultural concern for Nintendo as a company that likes to sell its products to think that they would only be selling a subscription, although arguably with their commitment to NSO they've already got past that particular barrier. A final possibility, and the one I personally would favour if it were possible for a game like Splatoon, is just having better AI players. I know it's not as good as actual players and some people dislike it on principle, but it does at least mean that players can still access stages that would otherwise be barred to them, and potentially the AIs could be trained on 7 or 8 years of actual player data. It's a bit trickier for Mario Maker, but let's do some maths. I've seen estimates that each Wii U Mario Maker course took roughly 50 kilobytes in storage, and estimates that there were just short of 70 million courses made. That means that the entire Mario Maker course archive could fit on a single 4 terabyte hard disk. In the scheme of things for Nintendo, that's a rounding error. And look, all of this may come to nothing. Laws change on long timescales. But game development, especially at Nintendo, also operates on long timescales, and Nintendo would rather avoid these kinds of issues, so I suspect that they will be considering how to future-proof their titles against legislative changes right now. Thank you for watching. Particular thanks as ever to my Patreon supporters, and if you want to like, comment, share, subscribe, click another link, or indeed check out the various goodies on the Patreon for yourself, that would all be really magnificent of you. Meantime though, I shall bid you farewell until the next Nintendo Forecast.